A homeless man gets adopted by a rich psycho and falls in love. What the hell? I screamed, jolting awake to find my tent, my only resemblance of shelter, gone. Someone had stolen it whilst I was asleep, leaving me exposed to the bone-chilling December cold. Probably some junkie looking for a quick buck. Look at yourself, Rob, I muttered bitterly, clenching my fists. You've hit rock bottom. It was astonishing how 6 months could completely dismantle a life. Once, I was a respected psychologist. I came from a decent upbringing, though my parents passed away early, leaving me with a quiet ache that never truly healed. In my grief, I met Andrea. She was charming, clever, and I fell for her, hard. We married quickly, building a life together. Or so I thought. But Andrea's mask slipped. Out of nowhere, she filed for divorce, accusing me of being an abusive alcoholic. Of course, with her eloquence and my stunned silence, people believed her. I lost everything, my job, my friends, my house, even my car. My last possession was stolen from me. Now, I was nothing but a shadow of my former self, wandering the streets, surviving on scraps, clutching a blue blanket, the only thing standing between me and the icy grip of death. I needed to do something drastic. No one was coming to save me. I scavenged a tattered piece of cardboard and a dried-out marker and wrote, "Will work for money." Hours passed, but people didn't so much as glance at me. It was as though I were invisible. Frustrated, I flipped the cardboard over and wrote in bold letters, "Will do anything for money." Anything? I wasn't even sure what that meant anymore. Hunger and cold had stripped me of pride, leaving behind only raw desperation. 2 hours dragged by, my arms trembling from exhaustion as I held the sign. Just as I was about to give in and collapse, a voice cut through the haze. "Well, this is the first time I've seen a sign like that." Startled, I lifted my head. My eyes struggled to focus. At first, I saw a long black coat. Then, as my vision cleared, I took in the vision of a man before me, a striking figure in his early 30s. His pale complexion made his piercing blue eyes seem ever more vibrant. Dark blue hair curled around his face like a winter storm, and his lips were startlingly red, as though he'd just bitten into a strawberry. "I'm talking to you, beggar," he said, his tone polite yet detached. Beggar? The word hung in the cold air like a slap. Insulting, perhaps. Accurate? Uncomfortably so. "Just as I thought," he sighed, shaking his head. "You're just looking to get money for drugs." He turned and started walking away. Panic surged through me, snapping me out of my daze. "No! Wait! No one's spoken to me in months. I'm not an addict. I'm just a hungry man trying to survive." My voice cracked, desperation pouring out with every word. The man stopped mid-step and turned back, his gaze sharpening. I'd piqued his interest. "And why?" he asked, his voice calm yet faintly amused. "Would I help you?" Out of the kindness of your heart," I said, grasping at the cliché I'd heard other beggars use. He rolled his eyes. "Well, that was boring." Turning again, he scanned the lot for his car. My chest tightened. If I let him walk away, I might not make it another night. I had to act. "Look, sir," I blurted out, my voice trembling. "I wasn't always like this. I'll work for you, do anything, run errands, clean your windows, walk your dog. Hell, I have a psychology degree. I could even help you on a higher level." Tears welled in my eyes, and I could feel my numb hands trembling from both the cold and the weight of my plea. He paused, raising an eyebrow. A small, almost mischievous smile tugged at his lips. He strode back toward me. "Stand up," he commanded. I obeyed instantly, my legs unsteady as I scrambled to my feet. He scanned me from head to toe, his piercing eyes assessing every inch. His woodsy scent drifted towards me as he leaned in slightly. "I have a proposition for you," he said with a faint grin. "I'll, let's say, adopt you, provide food, warm clothes, and a place to stay. But," he added, his voice low and deliberate, You'll need to honor what you wrote on your sign. I swallowed hard. The lump in my throat felt like a stone. What do you mean by that? I stammered. Simple, he replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. You'll do anything and everything I tell you to do. What does that entail? I asked, cautiously. But before I could get an answer, he turned away, waving dismissively. You're asking too many questions. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, he called over his shoulder. I don't like to wait, so take it or leave it. My heart raced. If I didn't go after him, I'd lose my only shot at warmth and shelter, even if it was just a shed. But what if he was a serial killer, preying on people like me? The thought made my pulse quicken. The blizzard blurred his figure as he walked further away. My legs were weak, but a surge of adrenaline propelled me forward. I ran, gasping for breath, pushing through the wind as the distance between us grew. Just as my strength gave out and I started to collapse, a pair of strong hands caught me mid-fall. It was him. His touch sent a shock through me, a human connection I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. We're almost at the car, he said formally. He gestured towards a massive black Range Rover, opening the door for me. Where to, sir? A driver asked as I climbed inside. He didn't even glance at me, as though this was routine. Home, the man said, his voice firm. He draped his own coat over me, wrapping me like a blanket. You're so skinny, he whispered, a faint smile playing on his lips. I can feel your bones. The words unsettled me, but I was too cold and exhausted to react. The car sped through the snow, and about 30 minutes later, we pulled up to a towering gate. It opened automatically, revealing a sprawling mansion that looked like it had leapt out of a fairy tale. 4 stories high, with at least 20 rooms and an immaculate garden that stretched endlessly. Who is this man? I wondered as we approached the grand front doors. They opened to reveal a sharply dressed servant waiting on the other side. Good evening, Sir Stefan, the servant greeted, then paused when his eyes landed on me, his brows lifted slightly. Oh, another one, sir? I froze. Another one? This was it. My gut feeling had been right. He was a serial killer. Yes, Blake, Stefan said with a chuckle. He's agreed to be my pet. He's cute, so I figured I'd give him a shot. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. Bathe him and give him something to eat, Stefan ordered, dismissively waving toward me. Right away, sir, Blake replied, gesturing for me to follow him down the hallway. I didn't say a word, too overwhelmed to process what was happening. Once Stefan left us, the questions boiled over, but just as I was about to speak, Blake interrupted. You know, we usually bet on how long you'll last, he said with a smirk. By the look of you, I'd say a week. I'm sorry? I stammered, stopping in my tracks. But I'm utterly confused. What's going on here? What am I supposed to do? And what does he mean by pet? Blake sighed, shaking his head. Rule 1, don't ask so many questions. Master Stefan doesn't like that. Rule 2, do what he says and you'll be fine. Rule 3, never question Master Stefan's sanity. Everything else you'll figure out as you go. He led me to a room larger than half my old house, complete with a private bathroom. The warm shower was heavenly, a fleeting reminder of the small joys I'd forgotten. After a simple but satisfying dinner, I collapsed into the plush bed and fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in months. But it didn't last. The door creaked open and Stefan stepped into the room. I jolted awake as he approached the bed. Sorry if I startled you, he said softly, his voice warm and disarming. You mentioned you were a psychologist. Startled, I stayed calm. Yes, I replied. What's troubling you, Master Stefan? He climbed onto the bed, sitting close enough that I could see his silk pajamas clinging to his muscular tattooed frame. Do you ever get lonely, Doc? He asked, his voice low, almost vulnerable. Well, yeah. Now, all the time, I said, playing along with his sudden vulnerability. But maybe that's because you're building superficial connections with others and need to work on your assertiveness. His piercing gaze locked onto mine, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he reached out as if to touch me, but stopped mid-air, his hand lingering for a moment. "You're too pretty to know these things, Doc," he whispered, his voice a soft murmur that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. And just like that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me dumbfounded. Could this night get any weirder? I was awakened by loud animal noises echoing through the mansion. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I stumbled out of my room to investigate the commotion. What I saw made me freeze. A donkey, a full-sized donkey, was casually roaming through the mansion's corridors, a bright red collar snug around its neck like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Let's get you outside, buddy," I muttered, approaching cautiously. Gently, I nudged the donkey toward the nearest door, figuring it had wandered in by mistake. "Are you mad?" Stefan's voice thundered behind me, and I jumped as he appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He pushed past me to close the door firmly. "How dare you try to put Miss Peggy outside in this cold?" he snapped, his tone filled with a strange mix of anger and genuine concern. "I take you in and this is how you repay me?" "A donkey as a pet?" I muttered under my breath, struggling to keep a straight face. "I'm sorry, Stefan," I said quickly, realizing I'd somehow offended him deeply. "It's Master Stefan to you," he corrected sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Meet me in the meeting room in 1 hour. With that, he spun on his heel and left me standing there, baffled. Blake happened to be passing by, so I seized the opportunity to get some answers. "Why is there a donkey in this mansion?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as possible. Blake didn't even blink. "Oh, Miss Peggy? She was brought to the mansion for a photo shoot with Master Stefan last year. After that, he took her in and gave her shelter." I blinked at him, utterly floored. Blake continued. "The amount of money he's spent replacing furniture she's chewed is astronomical. But, well, it's Master Stefan. And a word of advice. Never say anything bad about the donkey." "Noted," I muttered as Blake walked off. An hour later, I reluctantly entered the meeting room. My heart raced as I opened the door. Stefan was seated casually, wearing nothing but a bathrobe. His damp hair suggested he'd just showered. He looked up, his piercing gaze locking on mine. "Massage my feet," he said, leaving no room for debate. I hesitated, but reminded myself of our deal. Swallowing my pride, I grabbed supplies. Thankfully, I'd attended a massage course years ago. Kneeling, I focused on the task, ignoring the absurdity of the situation. The silence didn't last. Suddenly, the door opened, and a sharply dressed man walked in. My hands froze mid-motion. "Did I tell you to stop?" Stefan's voice cut through, calm but commanding. I sighed quietly, resuming the massage, praying for the floor to swallow me whole. The men acted as if I wasn't there, discussing investments and business strategies. As I listened, I pieced together Stefan's identity, a multi-millionaire who built his fortune on an influential digital platform, and now invested in high-profile projects. His commanding presence made it clear he was the alpha in the room. Humiliation burned as I kept my head down. Before the meeting ended, Stefan said, "You can stop now." Relieved, I stood to leave, but just as I reached the door, one of the men called out, "Dr. Rob, is that you?" My stomach dropped. I froze, then bolted without looking back. That voice, it had been a former client. I fled to another room, catching my breath. Minutes later, Stefan appeared. "Well," he began. "The man said you were his psychologist, so you weren't lying." "Of course not," I replied quickly. "Everyone lies," he said dismissively. "Now go do something useful." He left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Why had Stefan gone from protective to cold overnight? What has changed? Still, I wasn't going back to the streets. Whatever Stefan's game was, I'd endure it, for now. 2 months later, I found myself missing the streets. Stefan? An insane maniac with too much money? The things he made me do? My dignity was wearing thin. One day, we painted the grass outside because the reflection needed to be prettier. Another time, he made me skydive after one lesson. Did I mention I'm terrified of heights? Then there were car races inside the mansion and wild parties with exotic animals. I once spent an entire night chasing a miniature kangaroo in the wine cellar. Most mornings, Miss Peggy, the donkey, chewed on my blanket. But for all his madness, Stefan never drank, and despite the attention he got, he seemed uninterested in people, romantically or physically, just bored. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me. When I completed one of his ridiculous tasks, his face would harden into that unreadable mask. Blake and the staff were shocked by my endurance. Stefan had replaced most of them 3 times over, firing them for trivial reasons. Meanwhile, I stayed, clinging to the thought that this chaos was still better than the streets. One night, while searching for my slipper, likely claimed by one of the animals, I wandered to the forbidden 2nd floor. Hearing a scream from Stefan's room, I panicked. "No, please, stop!" I banged on the locked door. "Master Stefan, are you okay?" The screams grew louder. Without thinking, I rammed the door open and stumbled inside. Stefan thrashed on his bed, crying out. "Stefan!" I shouted, rushing to his side. He wouldn't wake. I shook him harder until his eyes snapped open. For a moment, he stared at me, tears streaming, then shoved me away. "Get out!" I didn't move. "What just happened? Let me help you. Out!" His voice cracked, but the anger was real. "If you don't leave now, you'll have no room to go to." His face was pale, his eyes exhausted. Despite his threats, I stepped closer and wrapped my arms around him. "It's okay," I whispered. "Whatever this is, you don't have to go through it alone." He stiffened, then broke, burying his face into my shoulder, sobbing. I held him tight as he let it out. When he pulled back, his face was red. "Why do you care?" "Because I care about you," I said softly. "You gave me a hand when no one else would, and I know you're a good person." He hesitated. "Every night," he admitted. "I can't remember sleeping peacefully." The admission hit me hard. I grabbed a notepad from his bedside table. "Is it okay if I take some notes?" Suspicion flashed across his face, but he sighed. "Fine. Not that I think you can help." "Let me try," I said, determined. He leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling like the answers were written there. "I was born into a family no kid should have grown up in. My parents were alcoholic, violent ones. My mother, though," his jaw clenched and his voice dropped. "She hated me. She used to scream at me just for existing. I was a reminder of everything wrong in her life, I guess." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm for his sake. "What happened after that?" "Social services got involved eventually. Took me out of there and threw me into the foster system. Thought things would get better, but they didn't." He laughed bitterly. "I was just fresh meat for the older boys in the system. They bullied me relentlessly. I tried to fight back, but I was small, scrawny, easy to pick on." My grip tightened on the pen, the words barely making it onto the page. "Did you ever get adopted?" He nodded, a humorless smirk on his face. "Yeah. 3 times. Each family was worse than the last. Violence, yelling, constant reminders that I was nothing. Once, there wasn't enough food left in the house, and the foster parents gave the last of it to the damn parrot instead of me. Told me its life was more valuable than mine." "How did you survive all of that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't survive," he said, his tone icy. "You just exist. And when you're weak, people stomp on you. They take what they want, do what they please, and leave you with nothing. I learned pretty quickly that the only way to stop that was power. With power, people fear you, and fear means respect." "That's not respect," I said gently, my heart breaking for him. "Your upbringing was toxic, Stefan. You can't take life lessons from monsters." He laughed bitterly. "But I am a monster. They made sure of that." I shook my head, watching as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. His need for control, the way he dismissed people, the walls he built so high no one could climb them. It all made sense now. He was broken in ways I couldn't imagine, but he'd never let anyone close enough to see. "Has anyone ever asked you how you're feeling?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. For the first time that night, he looked directly at me. His eyes were vulnerable. "You," he said after a long pause. My chest tightened at his answer. He hadn't just been abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect him. The world had never given him the chance to feel heard, to feel seen. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words got caught in my throat. Instead, I reached out and placed a hand over his. "You deserve more than this, Stefan. More than the nightmares, the guilt, the pain. You're not a monster, no matter what you think. You survived things no one should have to, and that means you're stronger than you realize." Stefan let out the deepest exhale I'd ever heard, like he'd been holding his breath for years. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and I decided to push further. "Is that why you've been treating me like this? Was it some sort of test to see how long I'd endure?" He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe," he muttered, then more firmly, "I know I treat you like shit. I don't know any better. Most people run away from me after 3 days." I crossed my arms. "You do belittling things, Stefan. Like making me massage your feet in front of people and treating me like a slave. It's degrading. If you want my help, that has to stop." For once, Stefan looked genuinely baffled. No one's ever contradicted me before. "Well, now someone has," I said firmly. "And I mean it." He nodded slowly, like he was processing an entire foreign concept. "Fair enough." "Good. Now get some sleep. You'll think clearer in the morning." The next day, I woke up to the usual chaos. Miss Peggy had found her way into my room, chewing on the edge of my blanket like it was her breakfast. I sighed, but an idea sparked as I glanced at her curious little face. Grabbing a ribbon, I tied it into a bow around her neck and scribbled a note. "Want to grab lunch?" I attached the note to her bow, then shooed her off towards Stefan's room. About 30 minutes later, Stefan strolled into my room, the brightest smile on his face. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me." I blinked at him. "Romantic? Was I flirting?" Later, as the sun warmed the garden, I found Stefan sitting outside. I approached cautiously. "How are you feeling?" He looked up, his expression softer than usual. "I had a dream," he admitted. "A good one. First time in a long time, and I'm sorry for how I've treated you. From now on, you'll be respected. As a psychologist, as a person." He paused, then added, "I've made some calls. You'll have an office soon, clients lined up. Consider it my way of saying thank you." I frowned. "I didn't help you for anything material, Stefan, just respect." "You have it," he said simply. After a moment of silence, he tilted his head. "Now tell me about you, your life." "Fair's fair." I hesitated, but honestly felt right. I had everything once, a career, a home, a wife. Then she took it all, left me with nothing. He studied me intently. "How are you not yearning for revenge?" I smiled faintly. "Because revenge doesn't rebuild a life. It just burns what little was left. Growth, forgiveness, that's where the real power is." Stefan stared at me for a long time, then smirked. "You're not as skinny as you were when you got here, you know. You're actually gorgeous, inside and out." His words threw me off, but before I could respond, he asked, "Do you find me attractive?" I froze. Did I? Objectively, Stefan was a masterpiece. Handsome, confident, and powerful, but romantically? I wasn't sure. Stefan leaned forward, his gaze intense. Would you ever give me a chance, or are you only attracted to women? I cleared my throat, unsure of how to word my response. I fell in love with souls, Stefan. Gender doesn't matter. He leaned back, seemingly satisfied, and the moment passed. Stefan and I grew closer, finding a strange rhythm in our chaos. We matched crazy with crazy, like hiding Miss Peggy and leaving cryptic notes for Stefan to find her. He started listening to my advice, working through his nightmares and treating me with a level of care I hadn't expected. Not only did he stop the staff from belittling me, but he also bragged endlessly about my skills as a psychologist. Slowly, against all logic, I found myself drawn to him. Not just his looks, but his raw, wounded humanity. It scared me, falling for someone so complicated, but I couldn't deny it. One evening, Stefan burst into my room, practically throwing a stack of papers onto my lap. "What's this?" I asked. "Happy birthday," he said with a boyish grin. I remembered. I flipped through the pages. It was a proposal for a new organization called ROB, Reducing Overall Misery, a non-profit for homeless people. My heart swelled. "You did this?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I'm crazy about you," he admitted, "but if you don't feel the same, I'll understand." I stared at him for a moment, my heart racing. "Thank you, Stefan, for doing this. It means the world to me. Thank you for everything." "Don't mention it. Also, stop thanking me for these small things. You always talk about how I've saved you, but in reality, you're my savior, someone I truly care about." He paused, gently tucking a loose strand of my hair behind my ear. "If I only had you in my life to talk to, I'd be a happy man." Goosebumps rippled over my skin from his words. "Let's say we've helped each other. As a man, I'd say that's the most romantic thing you've ever said. But as your psychologist, I'd advise you that relying on just one person for communication isn't healthy. You need diversity, different perspectives." Stefan cut me off, his hands taking my cheeks. "You truly are the best psychologist, Rob. I love how you've thrived over these past few months." Slightly insulted by the abrupt change of topic, I quickly recovered, my mind drifting to something I'd been meaning to bring up. My business had been flourishing. I'd declined the office Stefan offered, but he gifted me a laptop, and I'd quickly gained multiple online clients. I was doing well enough that I could afford to move out. "About the business, I wanted to talk to you. I now have enough resources to rent a place of my own, not to burden you anymore." I watched Stefan's expression shift from soft to hard, his eyes darkening. "You want to move out?" he asked, his voice steady yet firm. The truth was, I didn't want to leave. I liked Stefan more than I cared to admit, and I was starting to develop feelings for him, but I didn't want to live off him, to be another person draining him. I was thinking about it," I said cautiously. "Well, I won't let you. Remember our deal?" he began, but I cut him off. "Stefan, we had a new deal, remember? I'm not your pet, I'm your friend. You can't own me, and I don't want to use you." I said this calmly, taking both of his shaky hands in mine. "Oh, I want you to use me, believe me," he said with a cheeky smile. Goosebumps again, this time Stefan noticed. "I need to get going," he said with slight confidence. "I have a meeting that cannot be postponed." "Understood," I said, and nodded to Stefan while I was watching him rush away from the house. I was strolling to the library room, brushing books with my fingers, pretending that I was choosing which next book to read. But in reality, my mind drifted somewhere else. I could not stop thinking about Stefan, his rough hands, yet a soft touch, his demanding voice, but with nice words in it. I heard a sudden door opening. Like my thoughts materialized in front of me, Stefan came into the library and elegantly strolled right to me. "Meeting went well?" I asked casually, not looking anywhere else but him. He completely ignored my question and moved in a step closer, closing the gap between us. "I know I can't order you around, and I'm sorry for stepping out of line, but can I ask you something?" Stefan's voice softened to a gentle, almost pleading tone. Anything, I said with confidence. Would you kiss me? He asked, his gaze locked into mine. I swallowed hard, trying to play dumb. How did that question suddenly pop out? Stefan's eyes bore into mine, filled with a rare vulnerability. I feel like you want this too, he said. But your past is holding you back. If I'm wrong, you can reject me, and I'll understand. But if you don't, it means I'm right. I stood there, utterly confused, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Just months ago, I'd been convinced he was some serial killer, a calculated enigma, a man I couldn't trust. But now, I saw the pleading in his eyes, the raw honesty. My gaze dropped to his lips, full and slightly parted, curving into a smirk that sent a shiver through me. Damn you, I muttered before grabbing his collar and pulling him into a kiss. The moment our lips met, it was not a spark, but a fire hazard. Stefan's arms wrapped around me, pulling me even closer, our bodies pressed together in a frenzy. His lips moved against mine with a desperate hunger, neither of us pausing to catch a breath. Our hands roamed, searching and discovering each other in a way that felt inevitable. In the heat of that moment, Stefan pulled back just enough to whisper, his voice ragged with desire. You know we can stop if you don't want to. Please don't stop, I breathed, pulling him back into the kiss, the intensity between us only growing. Books started to fall off the shelves, first the horror section, then the romance, and then the fantasy ones, all of them now lying on the floor. But we did not care as we were in our own bubble, which we created together. Wow, Doc, he grasped my chin. Did anyone ever tell you that you were an amazing kisser? You're such a flirt, I said to him while biting his lower lip. I only need to say that Stefan called Blake and ordered that the library was a don't disturb zone until the morning. I realized that I am truly into Stefan, his personality, his craziness, but most of all, his honesty. It's not just the fact that I was grateful he rescued me, but he gave me a reason to give a chance to humanity once more. As we began our morning routine, which included clothes flying around us, we heard a knock on the door. Not now, Miss Peggy, I yelled, assuming the noise was from the ever-intrusive donkey. Blake walked into the room, looking as startled as I felt. I scrambled to pull the sheets over myself, heat rushing to my face. Apologies for the intrusion, gentlemen, Blake began. I wanted to notify you that there is an unknown woman at the front gate asking for you. I'll be there in just a second, Stefan replied, visible disappointment crossing his features as he moved to leave the room. Actually, Blake continued, the woman is asking for Mr. Robb. A woman? Asking for me? My mind raced through possibilities. Well, nevertheless, I'll go and greet her as a host, Stefan said, already heading towards the door. Yes, but Master Stefan, Blake paused, his tone light. What? Stefan stopped, mid-stride, glancing back. You might want to put some clothes on first, Blake added casually. I couldn't help but chuckle, but I shared my disappointment of having to stop this moment. We walked to the gate, my heart heavy with unease. There stood Andrea, my ex-wife. Her blonde ponytail swayed as a floral dress fluttered in the breeze. The moment she spotted me, her face lit up, and she rushed towards me, her voice breaking the silence. Oh, Rob, my dear Rob, she cried, throwing her arms around me in a hug that left me stunned. I stood stiffly, unsure of how to react. Andrea? My voice was shaky as I gently pulled back, just enough to look into her tear-filled eyes. What are you doing here? It's a long story, she began, wiping at her tears. I was manipulated by my family into leaving you. I didn't want to, but they convinced me it was for the best. I searched for you, Rob. I've been looking for months. I saw your name on an online page, and I finally tracked you down to this address. Her voice cracked, and she began crying harder, her body trembling against mine. I thought you were dead. I didn't know what to do. I stood there, overwhelmed, trying to process her words. Placing my hands on her shoulders, I tried to ground us both. Andrea, you left me. You took everything from me. Why now? She stepped back slightly, her hands moving instinctively to her stomach. Because I'm pregnant, Rob, and the child is yours. My breath caught and my body started to shiver. The timeline spun in my head, confusion and disbelief clouding my thoughts. Before I could respond, Stefan stepped forward, his presence commanding. Are you really that desperate? He asked, his tone cutting through the tension. His eyes narrowed as he stared at Andrea. Because that baby surely isn't Rob's. Andrea's eyes widened. How would you know? Rob, you need to leave this man. She grabbed my hand. I stepped back, pulling my hand away. Andrea, the baby can't be mine. We haven't been together in over 10 months. Maybe she froze the eggs, Stefan quipped, smirking. Stefan, not now, I snapped. Andrea's expression hardened. Rob, look at yourself. This isn't the man I married. He's twisted you. Anger flared in me. The man you married? You left me to starve on the streets. Don't you dare. I didn't know, she shouted, tears brimming. I thought you'd be fine. You thought I'd magically survive while you moved on? My voice shook with anger. Andrea flinched, her voice softer. I made a mistake. I love you, Rob. Doesn't that mean anything? Her words once gave me hope, but now they felt hollow. Love? You call leaving me with nothing love? No, Andrea, you don't know the meaning of it. She clutched her stomach. I'm carrying your child, Rob. Don't you want a family? Stefan shrugged, his demeanor light but his eyes cold. Wait, do you believe her? I mean, I know I'm crazy, but she's next level. Andrea's expression shifted from desperation to anger. I'm not crazy. Rob, don't let him manipulate you. He's got you twisted, doesn't he? Look at you. This isn't the man I married. Unbothered, Stefan smirked. Are you sure the baby's his? Andrea froze, her silence damning. That's what I thought, Stefan said coldly. I felt the final thread snap. Andrea, go home. You don't love me. If you need money, I'll help, but don't come back. Her tears fell silently. You'll regret this, she whispered. Maybe, I replied, walking away, but not as much as I regretted loving you. As she retreated, I caught her mutter. My credit card number is still the same. Stefan caught up with me, his pace quickening. Why on earth do you want to help her? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Because I saw that look in her eyes, I replied. It was the same look I had when I had nothing, and I recognized her body language. By her patterns, she must have lost all her money and got pregnant by some punk. Exactly, Stefan added. And she doesn't deserve anything. She was cruel to you. I paused, reflecting on Stefan's words and the journey we had both been on. Stefan, sometimes people don't deserve kindness. But when you helped me, I didn't deserve it either, and yet you showed me how to be kind and loving in moments of despair. It's something I learned from you. Stefan's expression softened, his eyes filling with a warmth that made my heart race. I thought I was crazy about you before, Rob, he said, his voice low, but now I know I'm even crazier. I wanted to ask, would you be my boyfriend? The question startled me, catching me completely off guard. Stefan, I began, searching for the right words. You picked the worst possible time to ask me that. But Stefan wasn't deterred. He took my hands in his, gripping them gently but firmly. You're the one person worth fighting for, Rob. I'd rather end up on the streets than let you go back there. You're my reason. Tears welled up in my eyes as I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tightly. Thank you, Stefan, I whispered, my voice choking with emotion. Thank you for showing me kindness and love, though it might not be the most conventional one. He laughed and hugged me back. In that embrace, everything else faded away. In the end, Stefan and I became a couple. I quickly fell in love with him, as his demeanor transformed not just towards me, but towards his staff and everyone in his life. He became more respectful, more patient, and a better listener. It was clear how much we had helped each other heal from our pasts. Our love grew from the ashes of our struggles, and we found solace in each other's arms. As for Andrea, I was right. Her intentions were never about reconciliation, but rather about my house and money to support her lifestyle. She had used me, and while it stung, I chose forgiveness. I helped her financially for a time to ensure she and her new child were taken care of. She never thanked me, but I found peace in knowing I had done the right thing. Stefan and I remained inseparable. I ended up staying in his mansion, not just as a necessity, but because we couldn't stand to be apart for more than one day. Our love deepened with every moment we spent together, and we became each other's soulmates. And of course, we didn't forget about Miss Peggy. To ensure her happiness, we adopted Mr. Bob, a male donkey, so she too could have her happy ending. Together, we all found a sense of joy and fulfillment, proving that even the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the most beautiful conclusions. Have you ever found true love in the most unconventional way? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.